Um, we are coming back together now to move into afternoon, which will work a little different than the morning. For people that are on the Zoom, I wanted to let you know that there is now a button on the toolbar called interpretation. And if you would like to click the interpretation button, you can choose your language. I apologize for this not being available in the morning, but this should solve any translation issues in the afternoon. Let me know if it's not working for you, and we can try to troubleshoot it. Our next session, I'm really excited to have the honor of welcoming Rhiannan Price from NASA Lifelines. Rhiannan is one of the folks who really led the recent humanitarian data simulation that the NASA Lifelines program was able to implement. And my colleague Ana Lopez-Carr and I were able to participate in this for direct relief. This was a 3-day simulation exercise involving over 300 people from around the world working on response to humanitarian crisis in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but with the specific goal of improving how we use data, particularly remote sensing and data that's derived from remote sensing to help with that response. And on day 2 of this workshop, our goal is in part to help with co-designing a simulation exercise that could be held here in Mexico. And in that context, I thought it would be really worthwhile to hear from Rhiannan about how that simulation exercise went, that she was instrumental in pulling off, and which I absolutely loved. And then the lessons that they learned from implementing this. So without further ado, Rhiannan, take it away.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Really appreciate that kind introduction. And you saved me from having to introduce the sim itself, so we should be able to get into some of the good stuff. But I've got slides to share too. Will folks be able to see my slides, or should I just speak through them?
They will be able to see your slides.
Okay, perfect. I will request that I can share. All right, wonderful. Okay. Okay, hopefully everybody can see this. I'll go through the first part pretty quickly because I think Andrew's synopsis was spot on. But as just a quick introduction in terms of what NASA Lifelines is before I jump in on the simulation, which I have the privilege of leading. NASA Lifelines is a community of the future using satellite data to improve humanitarian action. And the way that we're doing that is really bringing together experts from different backgrounds, different countries, different disciplines to address some of the barriers that have prevented us from collaborating and really unlocking the value from satellite data for humanitarian purposes. And so the simulation is one of the community building programs that we've been running, and really excited to talk more about it. As Andrew mentioned, our simulation was kind of role-playing game meets hackathon is how I like to describe it to folks, where we were challenging experts in teams to use satellite data to address various crisis scenarios. The scenarios were set in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and each day we had new things unfolding and new ways that folks were kind of challenged to use the data. As Andrew mentioned, it was a global online simulation across 3 days. We did 3 half days, which I've got some lessons learned to share about. We had 328 folks play. We had 53 different countries represented, which was pretty incredible. And a big thank you to all of our facilitators who were make or break, and lots of lessons learned on that. But we had facilitators supporting all of our players and making it a seamless experience. And folks were assigned to 29, one of 29 different teams. And a number of folks also had a chance to join us at an in-person hub around the world to also play. This is just a quick snapshot of those 53 different countries, all the areas in the world where folks were dialing in from, where they were based. So a really great regional diversity here. And then this is the example of where those in-person hubs were. And we had partners that hosted us at each of these places. And hopefully you can tell by the hub hosts themselves, there was just a really great diversity of folks that participated in the sim. So we had, you know, IFRC hosting in Geneva, Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team hosted us at their offices in Nairobi. We also had a hub actually in Goma in DRC, hosted by Dusoft Engineering, which I'll talk more about. That was really important to us, given that the scenarios were set in DRC. Then here in St. Louis, where I'm based, we had a geospatial co-op called T-Rex that supported and hosted us. And then Tufts University in Boston hosted folks, and the American Red Cross in DC as well. So a really great mix of partners. Just a few different photos to get so you all can get a sense of what the simulation was like to some degree. There are a number of photos from our hubs, of course. Those are the folks wearing the Lifelines t-shirts, but you can get a sense of really what it looked like. It was people on their laptops crunching. It was, you know, folks with many screens open to, you know, do the analysis, but also stay on top of everything that was happening in the online platform too. I'll go through these really quickly again, just so you get the sense of the setup. But these were the different teams that we assigned folks to. So everyone got a team assignment and a role assignment, and basically a backstory that they kind of adopted within the role playing elements of what we were doing. And that was a big success. We'll talk more about it, but the teams really leaned in on the roles, especially in day 3, because we had an election kind of construct that we were playing with. So highly recommend that. And then we also, in addition to assigning folks to teams and roles in advance, we also released what we call data toolkits. So as Andrew mentioned, the big goal for us was to accelerate use of earth science, of satellite data and geospatial tools within this remote sensing. And so what we did is we took all of these kind of remote sensing assets as well as derivatives and tried to compile them in one place to make them more accessible for folks. And we released this as kind of baseline data 2 weeks before the simulation. And then what we did during the simulation is we also had daily releases that were basically aligned to the different scenarios that were happening. So, you know, for instance, on day 2, our big scenario was a volcanic eruption, the Nyiragongo eruption just outside Goma. And so a lot of the data releases were keyed into that event and related. So you can start to see the response package here, some of the lava flows, air quality, some of the SAR data that we provided as well that were showing a lot of derived insights. Then we also curated a game board, and this is something where, because we had such a wide mix of folks playing, people who had never worked with satellite data before, people who had spent people who had spent their entire careers working with satellite data, we wanted to be able to orient people to the spatial components of the simulation. And so having a game board and having maps were really critical to that and bringing everyone along. And then we did it all in an online platform called Discord. If folks are familiar with Discord, an open platform, pros and cons to that as well. But you can start to get a sense of kind of the setup and how we architected it here for everybody. And then also how folks were actually doing the gameplay and what the actions were, using data and things like that. So you can get to see just a few examples of screenshots of actions that folks took. They would also decide they would share what their expected outcome was, why they thought that action would succeed. All of this was really integrated with the data and the analysis. So teams were really encouraged to think about that and to incorporate it wherever possible. And then our fantastic team of facilitators helped adjudicate that on the fly and manage all the moving parts along the way. Now, just to give you a few quick examples before I jump in on all the lessons learned of what the teams were able to produce, because it really was pretty incredible, especially when you think about the time. So the way that we did it across each day, where there were 30-minute turns, and so folks had to submit their actions within those 30 minutes and use data in that time, as things were very quickly dynamically changing. And so these are just a couple examples that I grabbed from day 2, where folks are visualizing some of the things that are happening with the lava flows and the area of impact in terms of the eruption. We also saw lots of different analyses, though, like looking at human rights violations vis-a-vis proximity to vulnerable populations, to camps and things like that. Or a similar but different look here on the left, where you're seeing flooded areas and where flood extents are also vis-a-vis those same vulnerable populations. And these are maps that folks were really generating on the fly. So suffice to say, they did a lot with a very finite amount of time. Just a couple more examples in terms of the analysis and the maps, again, just to give you an idea of what everybody was able to do. They were able to generate air quality maps, and here you can see this was mission critical, especially in the aftermath of the eruption. Looking at, where are aerosols, what are those indices looking like? So a few different layers there. And then a different look on the right, more so around access to critical resources and services. This is looking at IDP camps, vis-a-vis water resource distribution points and proximity to those and accessibility. One last example here is from our day 3. So this was more of a future looking day. So we did a lot more forecasting, a lot more kind of predictive analytics on day 3. And this is an excerpt from a team that went deep in terms of looking at energy and renewable energies and the potential thereof, and where existing grid infrastructure were, and what were opportunities for interventions to support local populations in the longer term. This is also just a fun example I wanted to share too, because again, in terms of the kind of roles that we gave folks, some of the roles that we also assigned were journalists. And so those players had kind of free reign to document what was happening and to report out on it during the simulation itself, as if they were actually journalists covering the events on the ground. And they did a fantastic job in terms of packaging things up. So these are their own creations, pulling data, pulling imagery, and packaging it for everyone. And there were some really fun things that happened with news going viral and just information flows during the sim too, that we didn't necessarily anticipate, but were welcome. We also had a construct of what we call kind of daily debriefs. And this was really important for us to bring everyone back together, because it was such a decentralized simulation in a lot of ways. Everyone was playing online. And so we had different kind of settings for each of these that the teams then needed to present recommendations, data evidence recommendations. And then the outcomes of these debriefs affected the gameplay the next day. And so these are just some screenshots from those debriefs and from some of the fun ChatGPT generated imagery that we used to just enhance the experience for everyone, as if they were at a donor review meeting amidst an election day, for example, in the big one here. Now getting to some of the feedback and the lessons learned, resoundingly positive in terms of the folks who provided their feedback. We had 38 people fill out our survey, so thank you to those that took the time and did it. The folks who participated give us about a 4.5 star rating out of 5, which we were taking as a big success. We had 59 different humanitarian organizations engaged, and 78 different, what I'll call science, technology, engineering, or math kind of organizations that were also engaged, which was the mix that we wanted. We wanted to have a pretty good balance. Of those respondents who also, the participants who responded to the feedback survey, 100% want to stay involved with our community, which we had hoped. 100% of our facilitators would do it again. So really optimistic about future simulations because of them. And then we're also really excited to see these last two stats, which were 97% of the folks who responded said that they learned something new, which was a big goal of ours. We wanted to have scientists exposed to how humanitarians work, and we wanted humanitarians exposed to the art of the possible with the data and with the research and the science. So that was a big win. And then we also really wanted to foster improved networks and relationship building. And so 87% of respondents said that they met a new potential collaborator or partner. And we'll be following up on these and hoping to support those partnerships moving forward as well. Now, this is a very dense set, a couple slides, so bear with me, but there was so much by way of lessons learned for us. This was our first foray, our first simulation that we've run as part of NASA Lifelines. And you can kind of see the themes on the left here, and I'll get into some highlights really quick in terms of our takeaways. But the diversity of participants, as I mentioned, was far and away one of our greatest strengths. And I think the success of the simulation was a result of this. We also noticed, though, that folks increasingly became invested day after day, I think in part because they were exposed to folks from different disciplines, folks from different countries, having an experience that they really just didn't get in their day-to-day. And so many people reported gaining new skills, again, because they might still be meeting folks from their own geospatial world, but they might, be in an entirely different sector and applying it in different ways or to have a different specialty. And so this was a big hallmark, I think, in terms of the strengths of the simulation. As I mentioned as well, our facilitators were incredible. I highly recommend, if you're running a sim, to have a strong facilitation team. We did a play test with them in August, a half-day training with them, and then held office hours to support our facilitators. And I think that time invested really paid off and was well worth it. We also noticed that our facilitators actually do read the materials that we share ahead of time. Not true about participants, so and also an important lesson learned for us, which we'll get to in the next one. But our facilitators showed up prepared and ready to go, and they knew the rules, they knew the strategy really well, which made for a good game right off the bat. On the next bucket, in terms of onboarding, this is where I think a lot of our biggest lessons learned were, or areas for improvement, I'll say. So we were, I think, overly cautious in terms of taking too much of people's time, of the participants, because we recognized that it was quite a commitment across 3 days, 3 half days even, for folks to engage. And I think as a result of that, we did ourselves a disservice, that we should have offered more times and more opportunities for participants to get involved, to have a training ahead of time, to be able to have just time to interact and meet each other even before the simulation started. So this was the biggest area of feedback that we heard from folks, is that they wanted more time together, more training in particular before the actual simulation started. That way that they could feel prepared and ready to kind of hit the ground running from the beginning. And many folks said that they wanted full days within the simulation, that half days were not enough. The next area on the tech learning curves were pretty intense because not only did we ask folks to log into Zoom, but we were also using Discord, which is not a platform that everyone was familiar with. So a lot of, at least the challenges up front were of a technical nature. And so we have some ideas on how we could mitigate against that moving forward. But having a tech support team, as we did, I think was a really important resource and something that helped reduce some of the issues that I think folks had in terms of the technologies that we were using for the virtual environment. A few other kind of buckets in terms of lessons learned. One was we heard from everyone that it was a very realistic experience. So even from, as I mentioned, we had a number of folks who joined us from DRC, folks who were even based in Goma specifically, that had lived through a number of the crisis events and things that we were working with. And all of them said, yes, it was very realistic in terms of my experience that they'd lived through, but also realistic in terms of just the level of coordination and collaboration necessary, as well as the sense of urgency that we instilled during the simulation. So folks really felt immersed, which is what we wanted. Some of the other feedback, though, that we really took to heart was that folks wanted this to be more equitable of an experience. And what I mean by that is, the simulation was run in English. We did it in time zones that were more palatable to those of us based in the US or in this part of the world. And so as a result, I feel like, we had not the same experience for everyone globally. And so we're looking at things like providing materials in even more languages moving forward, really trying to ensure that there's diverse representation across speaking roles, that there aren't just certain participants who are dominating even in the speaking roles during the simulation, and also playing with some of the design around this. So having more kind of regionally based run simulations, perhaps, so time differences aren't as difficult for everyone. Another big area was folks just wanted more time with the data. And I think this will probably be a challenge for us in whatever way we design a simulation moving forward. But given how quick the turns were and the limited gameplay, participants were left, wanting more time to interact, especially with the raster data, with the remote sensing, the satellite imagery itself. Much easier to use geospatial data in a limited time frame, much harder to meaningfully engage with satellite data directly. And so this was one of our kind of key takeaways, is playing maybe with some of those constructs. And then the last two lessons learned, one was just around the collaboration, and just we were blown away, I think, by the level of collaboration and how much I think people naturally collaborated and really stepped into the roles. And so that was a big win. And then we also heard from players that they wanted even more time to network and more time to collaborate even outside the simulation. And could we provide more opportunities for that? So that's one of our big takeaways. And then last but not least, hybrid events are always really difficult. And so having the in-person and the virtual was a lot for us to manage. I think there was so much value in having both, but we wanted to make sure that we, one, provide more opportunities for in-person, given that there was so much interest in that, but two, also communicate very clearly the expectations of what does that in-person experience look like, because folks were, in absence of us really communicating exactly what it would look like, had their own ideas around what it would be. So just to summarize a lot of that in terms of future opportunities moving forward, and then I'll pause and wrap and see if we have any time for questions, is one, value of simulations, at least for our goals, was really high. We noticed that they're very effective for learning and engagement and community building far and away. We also noticed that for future formats, we would play with that a little bit, that we would probably decide if we wanted to go fully online or fully offline, and start to have kind of the best of both worlds, but delineate it a little bit. We also have a whole bunch of lessons learned, and takeaways in terms of just enhancing the experience. So, making it more immersive with 2D or 3D maps, having more of an interactive game board, for instance, having even more breaking news segments, and some of those things, materials that we could always create more of, but that's what the teams really benefited from. And then last but not least, really being thoughtful in terms of our partnerships. So moving forward, I think there's an opportunity for us to think even bigger in terms of simulations. There are lots of organizations that are playing with simulations that are doing it for their own internal purposes, for training, let's say. And I think there's an opportunity for us to really band together and expand our reach and our impact using simulations in a more global sense too. So I'll wrap there and say I welcome any and all questions, but also there's much more information on our website, nasalifelines.org, if you're interested. All the lessons learned are written up in detail there, and lots more examples from the sim too. Thank you.
Rhiannan. I wanted to open up to any questions that you might have about the simulation or anything else that would be important here.
Julian, that was very impressive. May I ask, just for, I think, the sake of everyone in the room and people from other countries here on this call, can you give us some sense of the logistics, the planning logistics involved? How big was your team? And of course, you know, things like this are built layer by layer over years, but how many months of preparation did this take? So people and time.
Yeah, great questions. We started, I would say, in earnest, probably 6 months in advance. And that was in early kind of design and things like that, where there was maybe a handful of us involved. And then I'd say from August and September, we were in kind of full mode in terms of engagement. So I was more full-time on this. We had 2 fellows that were crunching with us. So not everyone was dedicated full-time. So it's hard to say, but we had a team of, let's say, 4 to 5 of us who were like very deeply engaged in this, especially in the last, I'd say 2 months leading up to it. And then I had the benefit of activating our kind of broader teams, especially around the facilitation, which helped immensely because we needed so many facilitators. But I'd say it was a pretty lean core team still.
Any other questions for Rhiannan? All right, thanks. Well, Rhiannan will be back tomorrow to talk about other dimensions of NASA Lifelines as we think about maybe zooming in on the collaboration piece of what she was highlighting here, which, as she mentioned, this is one part of a much larger set of efforts around how we build collaboration to support the kind of mainstreaming and utilization of new data sources in the kinds of work that everyone here is engaged in. I know I've learned a lot from participating in these, and I think that it's one model that is really worth learning from. So thank you very much, Rhiannan, for joining, and we're looking forward to having you back tomorrow.
Thanks, Andrew. Much appreciated. Thank you, everyone. Excited to be back.
Hey, thanks a lot.